I want to pre-apologize before I give my speech. I've had a couple of cups of coffee and I'm very hyper.
Then we won't fall asleep.
No, I just wanted to sort of add to what the gentleman, Mr. Whalen, said. I think this is what he was alluding to. It's with, some reluctance and a lot of humility that somebody that's such a junior, I guess, member of society as he and I are asked to represent such a broad base of people. So I think it's a great honor and I appreciate the opportunity. I was very fortunate to have been the understudy of a very influential leader for the last few years of his life. And I remember, by the way, I was assigned a different speaking topic, but I'll address that later. I was very fortunate. I remember one of the first arguments that he and I had when I was a young idealistic person just out of college. That's since changed, of course. He said to me that there are times when I'm going to have to say and act like I know what's best for the people. He and I went round and round about that. The second thing we argued about was that he told me you're not going to get very far if you fight for issues that are important to Alaska Natives and other indigenous people. I told him right then and there, how could you say something like that? His response was that at times we're going to have to work behind the scenes and we're going to have to turn other people's issues into our issues. I understand that now, but I think things are changing. I also wanted to add some context about this erosion thing. It's difficult for people to understand how we should sort of, have to consider moving a community when they're faced with these things. They should be self-supporting. And you have to remember that the whole reason why they were in permanent locations were because of forced federal policies beginning in the 1930s. Before they were mobile people, they knew that changes in the ecosystem in the land would require them to constantly keep moving. So some background on that issue. I also like to mention that sort of another reason as to why I'm here is a tribute to my wife, who passed away about 3 years ago from pancreatic cancer. So I got into college because I got tired of losing arguments to her. So I decided to go to school. And that's, we never know where we're going to end up. We never really understand what we're going to be working on. And I apologize for my low-tech approach. I think many people here know that social sciences is sort of the black sheep of the family, to be hid away when company is over when compared to hard science. So I'm used to half a broken blackboard, your shirt sleeves for an eraser, and overhead projectors, since I studied social science. As I said, I was a little surprised when I heard the topic, tech and contributions of local. I was assigned a little different speaking subject, and this sort of reminds me of the last exam I took in graduate school. I remember it was on the margin of my final paper, and it said, "Jack, once again, you've managed to completely skirt the issue and the ideas we've asked you to address. However, your comments and your supporting information warranted me an A-minus. So I've had some difficulty over the last couple of days trying to figure out what this body, how this body could benefit from my insights and experience. It's difficult because many Alaska Native leaders have to think at a macro level and sort of distill that down to how to implement on a micro level. And so this is a little backwards. I heard yesterday some people talking about what constituted scientific research. And I remember one of the first definitions I heard was that science results in conclusions that are objective and repeatable. Now, I still believe that. But what I think needs to be understood and integrated are all of the aspects of the human element. That may seem difficult at times, but there are almost rigid outlines to how humans will react and behave within situations. So I think that those understandings can incorporate some element of repeatable conclusions. I think one of the things that I expected to hear today, and I've kind of heard some allusions to it, one of the most difficult things for us as policymakers to understand is the difference in perspective from policymakers at our level versus those that will be impacted. One thing I like to remind people is that, at least many times within resource management, we're not talking about managing the resource, we're talking about managing people. And while at times it may seem relatively easy for us to develop integrated frameworks for addressing global problems, there has to be an area where those ideas are ground truthed. And that's what I see happening now within areas of Alaska. I'd like to say that we're past the days of developing policies, carrying out ideals on the backs of underrepresented groups, such as were done around the turn of the century when Sheldon Jackson decided it would be a good idea to introduce reindeer to Alaska. But in hindsight, that policy changed dramatically the lives and cultures and the histories of many Alaskan people, Alaska Native groups. Today, domestic and international policies are still being developed that will affect residents of the Arctic. With little integration, past, current, and future knowledge. So our objectives as resource managers and conservationists should be to develop robust understandings of the environment in which we operate and will ultimately affect. And that should include the human element. I've heard it mentioned sort of several times today, but I think one of the problems that's relevant to this discussion is what a famed academic named Clifford Geertz referred to as reductionist tendencies. And one of the things I like to talk about or mention is the lack of leadership in the areas of Alaska that are being affected. There are several times, and it's not just exclusive to me, but we have to be professional in all fields. We're always outnumbered, out-resourced. There are times when I'm in black rooms down the street, and I've got to argue on our behalf against 5 or 6 lawyers. So what I'm saying is if we start to approach what we do getting out from these reductionist tendencies, which means the ability or the way that us as professionals only have a limited scope of perspective or insights, unwilling or just uneven knowing about how to take other things that are important to other people into account. I think that's one of the biggest things. Now, I've heard all day long about how things are changing, how people support Indigenous participation, how much people care about the Arctic. The question is, well, how do we do that more efficiently and better? It's a problem we all face. One of the tough things is, at least in my field in resource management, we have the polar bear who comes under the Department of Interior. We have their main prey source, seals, that comes under the Department of Commerce. This makes it extremely difficult to develop mutually intelligible information and exchanges of communication. So right now, international and domestic policies are setting, have set an annual limit of removal for polar bears based on future predictions of loss of sea ice. There is no foundation or hard count of a population estimate, which is absolutely key in resource management. But because it's sort of the disconnect between ideals of conservationists and resource management, who think these things don't have immediate effects on people who are out there merely gathering food, a lot of times that isn't taken into consideration. So I just have a line here: in short, conservation objectives are being set without much understanding of the ecosystems in which they're attempting to influence. And I didn't want this to become negative or an attack on those involved in research. I'm an optimist. But I did think that this crowd warranted some frank understandings offered by me and identification of the real issues. It's very easy to stand up here and attack people for trying to do good in your communities, and too often that's the case. And I don't want to make that seem like that's what I'm doing here. But I think there are a couple of questions that even us, as resource managers or policymakers, need to ask. Is what we're trying to accomplish, will it benefit or hinder the people that it's designed to affect? Or is there some sort of common component that can end up being mutually beneficial? I'll give a concrete example here. About a year ago, I was on the island at St. Lawrence Island. And I was there on behalf of our federal partners talking about the development of this conservation for polar bears. And we were there to solicit input. How will this work for you? What would you like to see in it? What we were calling true co-management. And I remember one of the people that I was talking with said, you know what, we haven't had a hospital here in 3 weeks. We just found diesel fuel in the community's drinking water. And you want to talk about conserving polar bears now? I think that's some of the perspective that we need. Now, I said earlier that I didn't want to seem like I was, much of our research efforts don't benefit. They do. But the problem is how do we convey to the people that we serve that those efforts that we've been doing are beneficial to them? That's one of the biggest problems. We hear it. It's often referred to as communication and outreach. But what people need to know is you're not just here to work on some project that you're involved in and it's important to you? How does it benefit the community? Often it does. We're just not very good at relaying that message. So I think we've got much work to do. It's unfortunate there was a perception in local communities that very little research is relevant to Alaska. And this, really exists as a result of outside agencies and individuals who dream up research ideas without little or no input from most communities. Secondly, research at times has been called, or at least research in rural Alaska has been called the next great gold rush, where information is extracted and does not make it back into the communities in ways that illustrate or provide local benefit. And probably getting close here on time. I'm results oriented, so if anybody wants, I've provided here a document that says Omelak's wish list for current and future research needs. So anyways, before I came here, I called several other agencies and individuals to say, I have an opportunity to address a crowd. What is important to you? And it was fortunate that many of the same issues that they identified were ones that I had been thinking about as well. And I'll be leaving here just for people to know I'm leaving here and then heading to Juneau. As I said, we just formed Alaska's first waterway safety committee. That's another example of sort of integrating agencies and individuals in order to do better at what we're trying to do. I hope that the influence here begins to understand that this disconnectedness between agencies within DC has a real material effect on the way things go. It's unfortunate that we have several different response plans from different agencies, and much of those oil spill hazard mitigation response plans haven't been updated since 1997. And so we've got a lot of work to do, but one of the things I guess that is exciting each time I come to something like this is the constant talk about working together. So we have that sort of vehicle in place to do, and I just hope we take more advantage of it, and I appreciate your time.